This week, Conflict Zone is in Berlin, where the President of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, has been holding talks with German officials. Some 80,000 of his people have sought asylum here in Germany this year alone. But with improved human rights being promised at home and a crackdown on corruption, why are so many Afghans still wanting to leave? President Ashraf Ghani, welcome to Conflict Zone. In the first 8 months of this year, we've seen the highest number of civilian casualties in Afghanistan. We've seen 100,000 people more displaced around the country. How much worse is it going to get?
Well, thank you for inviting me. We've had one of the most difficult years, if not the most difficult year of the last 15 years. We are standing. We have ensured the survival of the state because that was what was at stake. How much worse will it get? It depends how much regional cooperation we can secure and how much international mediation and pressure can be exerted to create rules of the game between states.
Of particular concern, Mr. President, seems to be the human rights violations by local or national militia groups that are loyal to you, to the government.
We don't have militias.
Well, the UN reported in August that in the first half of this year...
Prior to my assumption of office, some of the local police were behaving like militias. We have issued orders that all people with political affiliations will not have local police serving them.
But are these orders being obeyed?
They are being obeyed.
Because in August, in the first half of this year, according to the United Nations, these groups carried out with impunity deliberate killings, assaults, extortion, intimidation, and property theft.
They were part, no, absolutely.
And they're supposed to be the good side.
The good sides were formed at the height of the war by your forces as well.
So what are you saying? It's our fault?
No.
It's the international community's fault?
No, on the contrary. It was a set of conditions that produced these. These were short-sighted measures to deal with medium-term issues. And what we've learned and what we are focused on is not, A, to engage in blame games, second, to define the problem and solve it, not to perpetuate.
Okay, but the UN's definition of the problem, and it says that the interlocutors in your country reported that government authorities were consistently unwilling or unable to control the activities of pro-government armed groups.
That is not accurate, as I've brought it to your attention. You're describing August. I'm describing November. We have taken systematic measures, and we have secured
consensus.
Since
then, you've removed the powerful political protection that these groups had?
A significant part of them. Look at Kunduz. I was in Kunduz on Thursday and announced an end to groups that would be tolerated. We have had a difficult legacy of 40 years, and cleaning up is not going to be a one-day's job. But we are engaged in a systematic effort. We have not allowed formation of new militia groups, and we are reforming the local police systematically so that they would not be abused.
And what about the political connections of these commanders, who your government officials admitted to UNAMA earlier this year they were unable to disarm them, disband, or hold them accountable?
But this is precisely what I'm saying. The legacy cannot be cleaned up in one day, but we are engaged in systematic efforts to reform the local police, reform the national police. The army is much better, especially our special forces, and thank God, there are no allegations, even in the worst of fightings, of human rights abuses by the army. The rest is a package, and it will be dealt with systematically.
How do you deal with the climate of impunity that's grown up for so long?
The climate of impunity, first, is rule of law. On Thursday, our reformist new Chief Justice changed the justices of all 34 provinces. And it started a systematic set of inquiries. Second is to deal with corruption. the Kabul Bank case that became the emblem of impunity has been dealt with. We've already collected $450 million out of the $800 million that were stolen from the public purse.
How do you say it's been dealt with, Mr. President, when just a month ago a prominent businessman, Khalilullah Frozi, who's supposed to be serving a 15-year sentence
He's back in
for
prison.
fraud. He's back in prison, but he was out of prison.
He was
smiling with government officials.
This is precisely, again, I'm bringing to your attention that corruption was a systematic feature.
But he was let out of jail. We were told that he was serving his sentence at night rather than during the day,
this is
which is
precisely
ridiculous,
the minute this became public, I ordered that he be placed in prison in solitary confinement. $20 million have been paid by him out of his debts. The property that allegedly he was using to partner on is now under legal process of being confiscated.
But what conclusion are people supposed to draw when this man gets a 15-year sentence and the next day he's out glad-handing with your officials at a new township?
The officials have been dismissed.
How many?
My legal advisor was responsible for this. The legal advisor has been suspended. A full inquiry is underway to deal with this.
You have to admit it makes a mockery, doesn't it, of justice? It makes a mockery when this man appears out of jail.
Makes a mockery when impunity is not dealt with. It, on the contrary, sends a signal of resolve when cases like this, that were the norm, are being dealt with. And he's back in prison, in solitary confinement, and under close attention that medical
day and night, or is he just going to serve in night, at night again?
This is in background. In background, there are no day and night distinctions. Earlier, prior to my assumption of office, he not only refused to pay a cent, he in effect had a wing of a prison reserved for him.
So you were surprised when he turned up with his government officials, were you?
I was.
Shocked.
And that's precisely, my shock was...
Having trumpeted the idea that this was a symbol of your new resolve.
My shock turned not into anger, but into action. Not into impotent rage, but into action. And it sent a very strong signal that I will not tolerate.
I want to ask you about signals you sent. You've been asked about this before. General Abdul Rashid Dostum, a man who you once labeled as a known killer. You ran with him as your running mate for the election. And you said, General Dostum is accepted as a charismatic leader by a significant number of my countrymen and women. It's out of respect for their belief in him that we've joined forces.
That's correct.
Does that make the crimes that he committed okay, whatever they were?
If there are crimes, he is asked for an inquiry.
But you called him a known killer.
He is the only person that is apologized as part of running, and is a very difficult environment needs to be. You're going to ask me in 2 minutes about peace.
No, I'm going to ask you.
How about Northern Ireland? What has happened? Peace requires conflict countries that have engaged in long-term conflict require healing.
But at least for people to admit what they've done, Mr. President.
Mr.
He didn't admit anything.
He has not been tried in a court. He has not been found guilty.
But his apology was the most general apology for suffering that people endured. Has it been done
by anyone else?
That's not the point, is it?
That is the point.
Because a lot of people in your country regarded this as wholly inadequate, didn't they? Wholly inadequate, including one of your successors.
Do you speak for my people, or do my people have voice to speak for themselves?
Well, I'm quoting from your people, actually.
Well,
Sibghatullah Mojadedi, the former president of Afghanistan, one of your predecessors.
Mojadedi is a very close friend of General
He said this was inadequate. He said Allah will never accept the apology of a person who has committed crimes and killed a person, because Allah never forgives those who kill innocent men. So he's not at all happy. And your Independent Human Rights Commission wasn't at all happy with this either.
Our point.
So it's not my judgment, it's theirs.
Our point is we are a free society. We engage in debate, and that's our characteristic. And because of this, our job is to heal and to move forward, not to perpetuate, not to get bogged down. We have moved to measures and criteria that all of us agree are important that human rights-based approaches are a must, and what is important is to be able to move towards these goals in a sustainable manner, not through emotional outbursts and not understanding the context of what we're facing.
And taking the people with you at the same time, because all the opinion polls at the moment show you're losing trust among the Afghan people. Last year, according to the Asia Foundation, 54% thought the country was going the right way. Now this year, it's 36%.
It is correct.
You've lost almost 20%.
That is correct, but look at the context. We've dealt with 3 transitions. An economic transition caused by the departure of over 600,000 troops and contractors that were the most important consumers and spenders in the country. In this context, we have had to impose an austerity program because the promises of the Afghan government to the international community were not credible. And we have carried credible programs.
But just a few days ago, you urged a crowd of people not to leave the country. You said, our dignity, our respect is in Afghanistan.
It is.
But if you can't guarantee them security or an economy that works, what have they got to stay for?
Do you guarantee security in Paris? Look, Mr. Sebastian, we are dealing with new threats, threats that are global, and our fight has been for survival. In the midst of bombing in London, did you ask for prosperity or did you ask for survival? Our case is one of national survival, and it must be grasped as to what the war this year was about. It was to create 2 political geographies in Afghanistan, to end the constitutional system in what we believe in the reform path that we've embarked. We've come out of this. A year ago, no one was giving the Afghan security forces the chance to be able to stand at this time of the year tall and be able to defend.
But your call to people didn't go down well with everybody. One person in the crowd said, how will they understand our pain? Their own children study, live, and are having fun in Europe and America. He has a point, doesn't he? I mean, the families of leaders in Afghanistan, they live abroad, don't they? Families of your vice presidents live in Turkey and Iran. Family of your chief executive is in India. Families of the top cabinet ministers, presidential advisors, deputy ministers, all outside the country.
Well, we have a complex diaspora.
But how can you ask the ordinary people to stay when all these privileged elite are leaving in droves?
The privileged elites are part of the globalization moment that we live in. What is significant is to create opportunities for the generations to come. And the point remains, if the families of the privileged live abroad, they are not going to have careers abroad. The careers are back in Afghanistan.
Do they know that?
They must. We have to create the conditions. If they live abroad, they become dishwashers. They don't become part of the middle class.
You didn't. You did rather well as a professor.
I did extremely well. I did extremely well, but it was part of my commitment. I'd signed an agreement that I would work 1 year for every year of the scholarship that allowed me to go. And the minute the opportunity was created in 2001, I returned. I hope that the new generation of Afghans will have the same sense of patriotism and respond to the conditions of our country.
If people stay, are they going to get listened to? Are their complaints going to get listened to?
Of course.
The reason I ask is the UN Development Programme discovered in April that out of more than 2,000 complaints about the police, which were referred to the Inspector General in your Interior Ministry in a year, just 9 were forwarded
and it's the
for
same
prosecution.
man that I fired. It's
just
the same Inspector
9.
General, the same Inspector General
But
that
what
I
leads you to
removed.
believe it's just one man?
It's because we've dealt with the Ministry of Interior.
He wasn't
system.
responsible for the whole 2,000, was he?
There were over $10 billion of investment were poured into the Ministry of Interior, but the systems were weak. What we are focusing on now, in the Ministry of Interior, whether it's from procurement of use of public money to the systems, is an overhaul. But this is again being done in the middle of an imposed war on us, where the police, the same police that are accused of corruption, and some of them are, and not listening, have done heroic things such as embrace a suicide bomber in order to save the population. both sides need to be understood, both faces. One face is ugly, the other face is heroic. We need to remove the ugliness and ensure that the heroic focus is enhanced so that the police can become respectable.
No time to find a new Attorney General so far?
The Attorney Generals, we failed, and we will find one. It is a failure, and I acknowledge it.
Senior law officer whose mission is to use the law to protect and serve the people. And that's not important enough.
On the Attorney General, I acknowledge failure. We've failed to do this, and we're determined to make the appointment soon.
But you did still find the time to propose a pretty draconian amendment to the Criminal Procedure Code, didn't you, that would allow for indefinite detention without trial. Why, when you were so critical of American methods in Guantanamo, do you adopt the same kind of method?
We've not.
Indefinite detention without trial.
We're dealing with suicide bombers on a daily basis. We're dealing with a weak judicial system where people who were given 20-year sentences in the primary court, their sentences were reduced because of corruption in the courts to 6 months or a year and then did not serve. Our security forces thought this was a mockery, and people were getting out with impunity and repeatedly committing crimes. Because of this, there was need for a signal in a time of national emergency to be able to do this. But the procedure, again, you need to understand, and I respectfully bring it to your attention, is the Supreme Court that makes the decisions, not the administrative part.
But human rights groups think this is a mockery because there's no specifying whether the detainee will have access to family members or to a lawyer, or the right to examine the evidence against him, or the right to challenge that evidence.
The court system can ensure, once the Supreme Court is charged with this, and we have an excellent Chief Justice whose integrity and commitment to law is second to none, can ensure this.
And these detainees are to be kept supposedly in a special place under the supervision of the prosecutor, separate from detention centers and prisons. What kind of places are they? Are these black sites, a la CIA?
No, there are no black sites. It's the Parwan detention facility that is specifically geared to provide maximum access to rule-based
without
approaches.
Oversight.
Oversight is that by the Supreme Court. I just brought it to your attention.
But how do we know that they are going to do that properly
Ask the Supreme Court.
And avoid the unlawful abuses that we've seen in other detention
centers. You think
centers.
that the human rights community is silent? With the megaphones that they have, there's going to be silence? Were there any abuses? Voice is not absent in Afghanistan. Voice is present, and it's paid attention to. Countries can get away with this when there's no voice. When there is voice, accountability follows.
You have a national action plan to end torture, but how much faith can people put into that? According to UNAMA, the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan, only one member of the Afghan security forces has ever been prosecuted for the torture or ill treatment of detainees. How can people then have faith in this new plan that people are going to be brought to account for abuses?
Because of leadership.
One man, ever.
You're describing to me the past. You're not describing to me the present and the intentions.
But the present hasn't happened yet in the form that you're describing it.
But that's precisely what we are focused on. One, we're never in denial, and acknowledge what we're dealing with, what kind of legacy is there, and how this legacy must be confronted and solved. Judge us by our action a year from now to see whether what we've put in place is going to be effective or not, because both international organizations and national human rights organizations are extraordinarily active and will document.
Well, one of the things that they're active about is the rights of women, and one of your biggest promises concerns the rights of women. You've committed to this as a priority, equality, empowerment of women. I want to show you a picture that emerged on September the 1st, which was published by Human Rights Watch.
Yes.
And it apparently shows the lashing of a 22-year-old woman named Zarmina, who was arrested in Ghor province a few weeks before. She and a man were accused of zina, which I gather is sex outside marriage, a crime carrying a sentence of between 5 and 15 years in jail. They were sentenced instead to 100 lashes each by a formal court, part of your judicial structure, that knows very well that lashing is illegal. Why is this still going on?
First of all, the inquiry has been made.
This is horrifying, isn't it?
It is horrifying.
Before we put it away, I mean,
No.
it is a horrifying picture.
Do you want me to hold it to the public? I'll be
No.
delighted.
No.
I'll be delighted.
No,
This
I'm very
is
interested
part
to
of
hear.
our shame. We've inherited situations that are shameful, that are absolutely despicable. And in Ghor, we want to make sure that Ghor is made secure for a rule-based approach. But again, transformation of gender relationships, that's one side of the equation. The other side is ministers, ambassadors, members of parliament who are extraordinarily articulate, who are extraordinarily committed, and I had the honor to nominate the first woman ever to the Supreme Court. She fell short of approval by parliament by only 9 votes. And next year, again.
And women at peace negotiations?
And women at peace negotiations.
But
Absolutely.
you were quoted as saying recently that you would not bother them until the right time.
I've not reformed the council. Right time means the opportunity to restructure the Peace Council and to ensure proper stakeholder representation.
Human Rights Watch said this is a signal that women's participation is somehow optional.
It's
that
not
you
optional.
regard it
It's
as
not
optional.
optional. It's not optional. The Human Rights Commission does not speak for me. I speak for myself. I hope that you're convinced of that you would not attribute words of others to me when I'm in front of you and can speak clearly and categorically that women's participation in the peace
So they
process.
will take part in direct negotiations
They will.
with the Taliban
Yes.
at some point when
Yes.
those
Yes,
discussions
absolutely.
are
Absolutely.
happening. Are they going to happen again, these discussions with the Taliban?
We're working on it.
How well are you working on it? How effectively?
It's not for you. It's for me to determine and make the judgment.
Do you trust Pakistan?
I don't trust anyone in matters of national interest. National interest is not about trust. National interest is about ensuring national interest in regional coordination.
You were going to trust them with some intelligence material, weren't you? You were going to share some intelligence material with the ISI,
We share,
Pakistani
we
service.
share what is in our interest, and they share what's in their interest. What is critical is to change the definition of interest, to being able to say that terrorism is a common threat and we need to join forces. We live in a part of the world where rules of the game, international law is incredibly weak. Rules of the game between states have not been defined.
But it is a mark of trust to offer them intelligence material, to offer the intelligence
We
service of
did it.
Pakistan material.
We
but
want
a lot
to
of
make
people
sure.
think that they're responsible
we've
for directing the
done-
Taliban.
We have done one episode of being able to share what is in future necessary is to create environment of trust between two states. The sovereignty of Afghanistan must be accepted categorically by Pakistan so that we can move forward. Small issues must not stand in the way of the big picture. 40 years of conflict must end. What Afghans need, first and foremost, is peace and security and stability, but that within our constitution, not at any price.
What is the danger that as these talks go forward with the Taliban, you will be required to row back on freedoms that involve women?
We will not. Those are not negotiable. I've been categorical in every instance. Chapter 1 of our Constitution.
On religious freedom, for instance?
Chapter 1 of our Constitution. If you'd permit me, I would finish my sentence. It may answer your question. But should you like
Please.
interruption,
No,
I would
please,
be delighted
please,
to
please
permit you
finish.
to enter continuously into my sentences.
Please.
May I?
Finish, please.
Chapter 1 of our Constitution, that's about the character of the state as a republic, as a country that adheres to respect for Islam and Human Rights Declaration. In Chapter 2, that is about fundamental rights of the citizens, are not for negotiation. As long as I'm leader of the country, this is not subject for discussion and negotiation. So the rights of women and all Afghan citizens will remain protected.
And Sharia will not be prioritized over human rights?
The discussion of place of Islam should not be reduced to slogans. Sharia is a very complex system. For instance, one of the most elaborate systems of protection of property rights and private contracts. What aspects do you have in mind? That is best left to the proper interpretation of the Constitution through the Supreme Court and the Commission for the Interpretation of the Constitution.
President Ashraf Ghani, thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.